All right, super. Okay, move on to item 7C, the Stage 3 Drought Update. Looks like Ms. Dyer.
Good morning, Chair Kilburn, Water Commissioners. My name is Kelly Dyer. I'm the Water Supply Manager, and I'll be giving the Stage 3 update today. So I will walk through the status of the drought, our water demands, our water supplies, give a brief reminder of our supply strategy, discuss drought funding, and then at the end we have a recommendation to City Council for the June 20th City Council meeting. So the drought is improved, but far from over. As you can see here in Santa Barbara, we are one of the remaining areas that is still in drought. The rest of the state has been challenged with too much water. So a very different story. It's important to really focus on your local conditions. Even this monitor is a very broad scale. So when you look at Santa Barbara County, there are certain areas of the county that are in a more severe drought than other areas of the county. So here in the South Coast, everyone still has an emergency declaration and has conservation mandates in place. This is Kachuma storage. So the green line is from the last major drought. The black line is from the current drought. As you can see, we tracked pretty well, very closely to where we were in the last drought, which is pretty, I think, a success story, given that this drought was more severe and also lasted longer. So the black line, we're now hovering right around 100,000 acre feet, which is about half full, and has basically rewound the clock for Kachuma a few years back to where we were when we first started making declarations of drought. So our demand status, here you can see the blue line is our drought target. The red line is our actual water usage. So our community has been saving. We had a 40% reduction in water use from pre-drought demands in April. And our 12-month running average is about 38%. So even though we've had the conservation target was changed to 30%, we're still seeing quite a bit of conservation, which is good for water supplies. A different story for rates. So here is our water production, historical water production going back to the 1980s. You can see there really has not been much change. We're still on kind of the downward trend for our 12-month moving average. We don't expect an immediate rebound in demands. That's been our experience in the last drought, that even after Kachuma was spilling, there were permanent changes that people made, and there would not be an immediate rebound to what demands were before the drought.
Yeah, just add something really quick. We see the 12-month average was 38%. For the model, what we've kind of structured with that is our expectation is in 18 is that we would see an average of about 34% conservation, moving to a 30% conservation in 19. So we are trying to anticipate, and that's the difficult part, public behavior on this. And we do believe that there's been some permanent changes of behavior. We are not anticipating people are just going to automatically start using significantly more water. And so we have tried to build some of that. Obviously, if we continue to see more than 34% conservation through FY18, that's great for supply-wise, but it may make it more difficult to meet revenues.
Chairman, I'm assuming that this shows just potable water use and not reclaimed water use?
This is the total of both systems, potable and recycled water.
The water's getting counted twice.
Well, this is the total system demand, including recycled water. So it's not double counted. It's similar to how our reporting is on our monthly water resources managers report. If you take the total potable system demand plus the recycled water system demand, this is the combination of those two. Okay, so our supply status, Gibraltar has stopped spilling in May. It's currently at 97% of capacity. We are continuing to maximize that source. The water quality is still very good. So we've been pulling as much as we can through the system up to our monthly limits that are part of our agreements and water rights.
We continue to get flows into the reservoir, but at this point they are going into the Jinchao account. And so it's basically, we have projected out, Mr. Ferguson has kind of projected out somewhere between 400 and 500 acre feet of a release that we'll need to do this year to satisfy that judgment, a water rights release. And so there is water still coming into the reservoir, but at this point we're taking water out quicker than it's coming in.
What's the timing of that release? Is that, I thought it had to be kind of a monthly thing, but is it, you can do it in a slug?
The judgment only stipulates that you do the release before November 31st. And typically we do a slug over a 2 to 3 week period. So it can vary any time between June 1st and November 31st when we do that release.
Okay, thank you.
Kachuma storage is about half full. The fish releases have resumed. They're about 4 acre feet a day the last time I checked. And we did receive our 40% allocation from the Bureau for this year, and it's looking like in October of 2017, the beginning of the next water year, we'll receive another 40% allocation, with the ability to still request a higher allocation next spring. If we get a bunch of rainfall and Kachuma spilling, we would ask that 40% be bumped up. So we've mentioned before, not all the water in Kachuma is project water. That's why we have the 40% allocation. It's the next chart is produced by the county, Santa Barbara County Water Agency. I'm not going to go through all of the different accounts. The purpose of showing you this is that there's a lot of accounting that goes into the Kachuma project. And when you look at just our project water, the 40% allocation we had this year, it's this part at the very top. The light blue is our 40% allocation. There's about 16,000 acre feet of unallocated water here, and that is what we project will be allocated come October 2017 for next year's allocation. We have our imported water stored. We have fish passage water stored. A&A and B&A accounts are the downstream water rights, and then, of course, there's a minimum pool of 12,000. Something that's a little bit different this time around compared to the last time you saw this chart is there's now a 3-year projection for fish releases and evaporation. That's something that the county has added in here to demonstrate that it's really related to the timing of when the barge would be necessary. So we wouldn't need the barge for 3 years until 2019 based on our current allocations and projections. It also helps to reserve some water for evaporation so that we don't get into a situation where it's coming out of, we've got to change the evaporation formulas. So it's a different approach. I don't know that this will stick and continue to be the way that it's approached, but it's something that we've all agreed to temporarily to agree on the 40% allocation.
Mr. Chair, I think this is a great chart, by the way, and that amount, the project water remaining it's instructive. I mean, that's when everybody out, all 250,000 of us on the South Coast or whatever we are not aware of that small amount. So this is a great chart. The one piece I don't understand now is the ANA buffer. Can you describe what that is?
So this is it's now in the chart as a result of something that happened when, I think it was last year, when Kachuma was at its very low point, and the downstream water rights, under their water rights language, is allowed to release a certain amount of water, and it ended up dipping into the 12,000 minimum pool accounting. So the county has added this buffer in there to ensure that that won't happen again. There was always more than 12,000 acre feet of total water when you add up all the accounts, and so the concept of the minimum pool, I think, we never really fell below the 12,000 water level line, but they've added this in here as a result of the negative balances in the A&A account that occurred last year when the downstream water rights releases occurred.
We have yet to really get in and discuss what this means. I mean, in my mind, it's not a separate, that it's not water rights that we should be holding in a separate account. So I think there's a lot of dialogue we still need to have about exactly how to manage that. I kind of think it should be part of the minimum pool and not in addition to the minimum pool. But
right. So we do have this draft up in the upper right of this chart, because I think a lot of this is still open for discussion. We haven't all come to agreements on exactly what the processes will be going forward, particularly as it relates to our 2020 Kachuma contract that's up for renewal. But this chart is produced by the county, and this is something, the latest version that I have on the water accounting.
So thank you, thank you for that, staff and Mr. Chair. This also speaks to the eroding amounts that the South Coast has, the Kachuma that has to get out of Kachuma. It's a constant scratch away at it, and that 2,000 acre feet down at the bottom is just yet one more little chip at that. But obviously, all those fish releases are numbers that, when Kachuma was created, that was not there, and really, it's fairly recent that kind of water is now set aside. And one of the ironies that we keep running into on the regional level is that a lot of that water, that 4 acre feet a day is what you were saying, is actually going to hurting the steelhead habitat by sustaining the 3 Bs, the bass, the bullfrogs, and the beavers. And those actually impede and hurt the ability of the steelhead who live in tributaries, and that's really the habitat that's really working out there, that really hurts the steelhead's ability to get to complete their path down and up their main stem of the San Ynez. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, back during the drought, I remember staff coming forward saying we had some concern on where the evaporation was being accounted to. Is this moving in the right direction according to your opinion right now?
I think we need to think through it a little more. I have hesitations on looking at a 3-year projection when we're doing allocations. The State Water Project doesn't do that. I think we need to consider potentially looking at a 1-year look ahead. It's hard to predict what will happen 3 years from now. Things could change here. Even the fish releases with the state water rights order that we have in the biological opinion will certainly have an impact on the water availability, but it's hard to predict what the inflows are. We have such a flashy watershed. So I think we need to talk more about how many years we're really going to reserve water for evaporation. Is it going to be 1 year or is it 3 years? Because if we're holding on to that account for evaporation, it could be reallocated or repurposed to something else other than water supply, which we don't necessarily want to happen.
Good. That's what I was looking for. Thanks.
It was really powerful about this graphic, particularly when we were talking with the county. They were pushing for a longer horizon in our planning on this. And you could quickly, looking at the evaporation account, if you go out another year, there really is no water to allocate. I mean, you play that equation. I mean, I think that's fundamentally one of the things we need to get corrected. Kachuma is not a 7-year reservoir. If nobody took any water out of it, all you did was your fish release downstream and evap, it pretty much you ate the lake up. There, it's gone in 7 years. So I think really fundamentally we need to revisit that discussion and talk more seriously about what I think a more optimized approach to utilizing the reservoir is, and we're probably talking in the 3 to 4 year range is what is optimum. And that's why we need to continue to diversify our supply mix like we have led by example here. And that is the kind of the key is, there's a role for Kachuma to play, but we also have a role for recycled water and desal to play in that mix as well.
I have to say this is kind of misleading too, because that A&E buffer isn't that they're already in the negative on that, aren't they?
They're no longer in the negative with the rains that occurred this year.
They paid it back already.
It's been paid back. Okay, so state water deliveries resumed. We've been maximizing the capacity as much as we can, and I think all the other agencies will continue to do that through this year. One of the reasons being that San Luis is pretty full, and that's a big change from where we were previously in the drought. With San Luis subject to spilling again next spring, everyone's trying to get their water to Kachuma as much as they can. So the city's imported water and storage, we currently have about 2,200 acre feet in Kachuma, about 3,800 in San Luis, and if we continue to maximize our deliveries, we project to have about 1,800 remaining in San Luis at the end of this calendar year. Because it's at risk of spilling, we're only planning to carry over about 900 acre feet of that to the next 2018. That's how much we could reasonably use within or have delivered to Kachuma within a 2 to 3 month period, assuming a spill would occur in March. The remainder of that 1,800, we're planning to repay AVEC, the city owes water debt, to Antelope Valley East Kern Water Agency. That's where we've received a lot of our supplemental water purchases over the years that were necessary during drought. Those agreements included an exchange component. For example, if we purchased 3 acre feet of water, we had to return 2 acre feet over a 10-year period. So our current water debt is 6,200 acre feet. AVEC has indicated and confirmed that they can take return of water this year between July and December. So we've actually been in discussions on potential water purchase opportunities to buy water at a lower cost this year and just use it to repay some of that water debt to AVEC.
Is that physically transported to Antelope Valley, or do they have a account in San Luis, so it's just a matter of leaving water there?
We would do the exchange at San Luis, at which point Antelope Valley East Kern can take it whenever they request it. I think they'd request it through this calendar year because of the risk of spill next year. And we are obligated to pay for the conveyance of that water to AVEC when they take it. So the conveyance costs are roughly $250 an acre foot. So if we returned 2,900 acre feet this year, which would be the 900 we already have in San Luis, plus another 2,000 that we might purchase, that would be about $725,000 of conveyance costs that we'd owe to AVEC for returning the water. We did budget $2 million in the drought fund in anticipation of this type of work, and so we would have sufficient funds in order to do this transaction this year.
How does that conveyance cost work? If we just took it down and put it in Kachuma, we'd still be paying about the same conveyance fees, or is it different?
They're the same concept. Our conveyance costs are a little bit higher to get it because it has to be pumped up to Kachuma. Ours are roughly $350 an acre foot. So our conveyance costs are a little bit higher just because of the infrastructure and pumping.
Okay, but that's already budgeted into our...
It's already budgeted into our normal water fund budget.
And as I'm sure Ms. Dyer is aware, Antelope Valley is actually the most expensive place to convey water to on the main branch of the State Water Project, because it has to be pumped up there from Wheeler Ridge up to Antelope Valley.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we were approached by the city of Santa Maria in May. They have more water supply from their state water allocation this year than they have demands, and they're also concerned about the risk of spill for next year at San Luis. So they're looking to sell up to 4,000 acre-feet of their water. Our agreements with CCWA allow for these types of water sales among CCWA participants. So we have negotiated a price of $225 an acre-foot, which would be a total purchase cost of $450,000, and this would fall under that $2 million budget that we have in the Drought Fund for supplemental water purchases. Santa Maria City Council will consider authorizing the sale on June 20th. Montecito Water District is interested in the other 2,000 at the same purchase price. And this is because it's part of our existing agreements that we can do these water sales internally within CCWA. We will be posting a CEQA notice of exemption if this is approved, once this is approved by the Santa Barbara City Council. I have a recommended action at the end of this presentation, which is for Santa Barbara City Council to authorize the Public Works Director to execute this water purchase agreement.
Could you just real quickly go through, like, what are the pros and cons of buying this water versus just paying it back with our allocation? I mean, it's a good price, and I'm not saying don't do it or anything. I'm just kind of curious, like.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's unpredictable to know how much state water allocations we're going to have in the future, and when we might get another opportunity to do this. So the 6,200 acre-feet water debt is something I've been concerned about. I wouldn't want us to dig ourselves in the hole any further, since it is a pretty substantial amount of water for the city of Santa Barbara to have to pay back. Our state water allocations, our Table A amount is 3,300. We have not seen a 100% allocation in years, so I don't know that we're going to get close to the 6,200 for quite some time, unless we do pursue additional water purchase opportunities. It could happen, but it might take a long time, and it's also unpredictable. So I'm looking to just kind of get this off the books and start fresh, especially if the drought's going to continue. We don't know what's going to happen next year, and don't want to dig ourselves in the larger hole of water debt.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. I just thought I'd throw that question out there.
Okay. Groundwater basins are currently resting. We're taking our Gibraltar water while it's available and while the water quality is good. And so we do have a limited amount of water left in our groundwater basins. If the drought continues, we would plan to restart up our wells as necessary. Full recovery of the basins, just based on past experience of how the basins have responded, could take anywhere between 5 and 10 years before they're completely full if the city does not pump. And there was a request in the last Water Commission meeting to bring back the charts of our water levels. So this, I think I'll show these in this month's drought update, and then going forward, move them into the Water Resources Manager's report. But this is our Foothill Basin, just a few select wells that we monitor. We actually have 60 monitoring wells throughout Foothill and the Santa Barbara Basin. As you can see, we did receive some rainfall this spring, but it wasn't enough to really make a big dent in recovering the water levels. So this is going to be somewhat of a slow process before we see the overall trends change. There's always these seasonal fluctuations, but what we're looking for is this sort of long-term trend to come back up. This is storage unit 1, and the recovery here, storage unit 1 is more responsive to the city's groundwater pumping because it's a more confined basin. It's under pressure, so when we start pumping, the water levels dramatically decrease, and then when we stop pumping, they go back up relatively quickly. So in storage unit 1, water levels are not as much of a concern. What we're more concerned in that basin is seawater intrusion. So I have separate charts, which I didn't put in this PowerPoint, but we have them available if you're interested. We did see some seawater intrusion very near to the coast, but we did not see any that occurred past the 101. So I presented those charts earlier. We haven't really seen much change in the concentrations for seawater at this point. Okay, so for recycled water, we have finished the construction modifications, and we'll be starting a testing later this month on June 19th. It's a 2-week period of testing the maximum production capacity of the plant. And so I think sometime in July we'll know the results of the construction modification. And I don't know if you want to speak to what we're doing on the legal action.
So I know the Water Commission's been interested in this, and I unfortunately can't go into a lot of detail, but we are pursuing legal action to recover costs for the design errors that we saw, and just met with the attorneys last week, and we hope to have this before a judge in the next year. We'll see, but we do have some outside counsel that will be supporting us on this, and I think that's about all I can say at this point.
The good news is the facility has been meeting all of our recycled water demands on the system. So even during the recent construction modifications, we did not need to turn on the Valle Verde well, and we didn't need to do a blending with potable water. So that was good that we've been able to meet those demands with recycled water.
Are we into summer demand yet, or is it still coming?
No, it's starting to pick up. I was going to referencing the water supply manager's report. In there, you can see that demand has been starting to pick up pretty consistently. Is there no gap between what that anticipated demand will be and what you're producing now, or will there be a gap?
I think we'll know at the end of this production testing whether we can meet that gap. Last year, we had to turn on Valle Verde well and use some potable water to meet the gap. Sure.
So major construction is complete on May 30th. I think you probably all received an email. We did a big media blast to let everybody know that the facility was online and would be operating intermittently through the startup and testing phase. The phase that it's in right now, we're calling it acceptance testing. They have to demonstrate operation for 14 days. And reading into it some more, they can do it in 24-hour increments. And so far they've had about 5 days where they've had it actually operating for 24 hours. Otherwise, it's been on 18 hours, 15 hours, those kind of stretches. Then they take it down. They want to make some tweaks. As you can imagine, a facility of this magnitude has a lot of alarms set up in it, and so when any of those alarms get triggered, it automatically stops going into the distribution system. They have to go in and figure out what the alarm was from, which allows them to operate this facility with a fairly small staff. That's kind of all the part of the automation. So we expect this. Nothing so far has been too abnormal. Kind of just continuing to work through issues. Given the activity that's going on site, we're not offering any tours at this point. There's been a lot of people reaching out and saying, I'm going to get a tour. However, when we do finish all of the startup testing and things, we've gotten to some type of normal operation, our full intent is to offer some type of public open house, allow people to come down and check it out. Anticipating that probably be late summer, early fall, we'll do something like that. So likewise, we'll roll out an invitation to the Water Commission to do a tour as well at some point here when we get to that.
And that small staff is contractor staff, not city staff?
That's correct. The staff for this facility, I want to say it was around 11 staff members to run the facility full time. Unlike Cater and El Estero, they have to have a proven record of operations before they're able to run this facility in automation for short periods of time. And so they have to have someone here 24/7. So they have 3 shifts a day that roll through here. And I think at least one electrician and one mechanic that are on staff. So those are all contracted staff. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just as a summary of our water supplies, we're currently in year 6 of the drought. We started the drought when Kachuma last spilled, which is in May of 2011. So here we are, and we're planning to use a portion. The green is desalination, the orange is state water, the yellow is our groundwater, which was used previously in this water year. It's now been shut down. And then the light blue is Gibraltar and Mission Tunnel. The dark blue is Kachuma. So we're primarily using Gibraltar this summer, and then that 40% Kachuma allocation that we have serves as contingency for this year, but we would really plan to carry it over and use it next year. And then we have the purple bar, which is our recycled water. This all assumes a 30% demand reduction through the next 3 years. So we do have a small gap projected in 2019, but it's small enough that I think by the time we get there, we can make it up with the resources that we have available to us.
Is that in 7 and 8, does that green bar represent full production capacity?
Correct. The green bar in 2018 represents the 3125 acre feet per year.
So by the time we get there, if we're still calling it a drought, we've got all our eggs there other than what supplemental stuff we can go out and buy, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay.
I think even the orange bar is not really maxed out to if we went out to purchase additional supplemental water from the state water system, we could likely fill the gap too. What's shown here is what we've already got, what already has our name on it. So drought funding, Prop 1 water desalination grant program. I'm going to let Mr. Hagmark, cover this slide as well. I think he's been in touch with quite a few people on this.
So trying not to get too excited about this, but this is something that I've been working on for probably 2 years now, and I know we've been talking about it. But Prop 1 funding, which was passed in November of 2014, we've been following this. I've made a visit up to Sacramento to make sure that the state understood our needs. And the draft guidelines came out in April, and unfortunately they had language in there that would have excluded our project from participating because we will have been have completed all major construction by the time this grant gets awarded. And with the help of many people, including Senator Jackson, we have finally got some movement. And I understand, I just had a discussion with a representative from Senator Jackson's office that says that they have made all the changes that we've requested, and the guidelines are due out this Friday. And so we will hopefully see that the city can compete. And then again, getting back to that's all we're asking for is the ability to compete in this grant funding, because we believe we have the ideal project that was for this project, for these funds. And the way that it works, based on the draft guidelines, was there's $10 million available in matching grant funds for construction. There was also funding in there for studies, and that'll be something that we'll be taking a closer look at too as well, particularly getting reimbursed for some of the studies that we had to do, and maybe even talking about potentially getting some funding, because I think there's been a strong desire to do some offshore testing to see what the real impacts are of this facility. And the challenge with that is that testing, we did get some costs for that in 2015, and it was well over $1 million to do a test to see what the environmental impacts were. It was a significant cost. And so if we're able to leverage potentially some of these grant funds, I think would like to do that, because I don't believe the impact is very significant, and I think it'd be nice to quantify what it is. So we will stay tuned, but at this point, we should know more next week when we get a peek at it and get to go through it. So this is exciting. I mean, a potential of $10 million. I think the timing for this grant is early 2018 is when they'd like to start distributing those funds. And obviously we have $70 million in matching money that we could put towards that. So shouldn't have any problem meeting our match.
Okay, so we're asking for the Water Commission to recommend that Council authorize the Public Works Director to execute a water purchase agreement with the City of Santa Maria. This is the 2,000 acre-feet agreement at a purchase price of $225 an acre-foot. There's no return obligation to City of Santa Maria. This water would be used to pay down some of our debt that we owe to AVEC. So City Council will consider this item on June 20th.
Chairman, just a brief question on the chart of the water supplies that you had at the end of the last section. Right. If we go from the bottom to the top of those bars, are those in the order of increasing cost of those supplies?
No, they're not. They're sort of arbitrarily, I guess, it looks like maybe it would have been close to that order, but it's not. It wasn't done with that intention. So, no.
Now, since we're using that to justify our costing that we're developing, it might be interesting to have a chart that ranks them so you can see what is the expensive water that the Tier 3 people are being charged for and the other ones.
It's a interesting point. My only hesitation in doing it would be that cost is sometimes not always the only thing you're considering when you're managing a resource, because we have other constraints like water rights and availability of, overdraft of a groundwater basin. And so sometimes we're not using it. We're forced into using our more expensive sources for other constraints that we have in management of water supply.
So in the orange bar, you have a mix of costs because the purchased water is not always the same cost as the regular state water. So it might be hard to actually set it up that way.
In the there will be a memo that we have that accompanies the rates. Once we get the rate notice out, there's a rate memo that we do. It goes into great detail, and it will answer those questions of exactly what it has in there, what priority each one of the water, and it shows how each one of the water supplies ranks and how it fits into meeting the service to each one of those classifications. So it has some of that information in there.
I think that was the end of our presentation. So,
Being said, I will move that we forward the item to the City Council for the Santa Maria water.
If you're moving staff recommendation, I'll second that.
Okay. Do we want any comment before we vote, or? No? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
thank you.
All right. Super. Thanks.